Welcome back to Leadership Trailblazers. I want you to imagine this scenario and see if it feels familiar. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You've been in back-to-back meetings all day. You've answered around about 50 emails. I can hear some of you saying only 50. And right now, somebody's sitting in front of you and asking you to make a decision on something that's important. Might be an important people decision, could be a strategic call that's going to affect the next 6 to 12 months. And if you're really honest with yourself, you haven't quite got the clarity of thinking that you would like. You feel depleted. And quite often when we feel depleted, what happens is we reach for the decision that causes the least friction rather than the one that is right if we had all our clarity of thinking operating at its highest. Because you're running low. And this is called decision fatigue. And it is actually a real neurological phenomenon. And it's been documented, and it's quietly undermining decision-making at the top in many organisations. So what's the research around it? This came from Baumeister and his work on ego depletion. And what he found was that decision-making draws on a finite cognitive resource. Every decision costs something from that finite resource. So thinking about what you're going to have for breakfast comes from the same pool as thinking about your team restructure. One of the most famous studies on this was a Parole study. And the findings were that favourable rulings drop sharply as the day progresses. And that's nothing to do with merit. It was to do with the depletion of the judges. The default response was refuse the parole and keep the status quo because it costs less mental effort. And this is not intentional. This just comes from that real drain of that cognitive resource. You've heard me speak about the prefrontal cortex many times, and it's the first to go offline when you're depleted. So then, as I say, we default to familiar patterns that take the least effort. And with some of my coachees, when we actually looked at how many decisions they made in a day, they were actually staggered. One person counted up 243 decisions that she'd made that day. And again, they weren't all big decisions, but some of them were. And they were often being made at a time when she was suffering from decision fatigue. And what she said to me was, I'm making some of these decisions and then I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh no, shouldn't have done that. I should have done something different. And then I have to go back, rewind. That often takes time and trouble. And then we have to go again. She said, so I'm realizing that this is a very big deal to me. And somehow I have to reduce that volume. Another coachee, let's call him Tom, in manufacturing, when we were doing this exercise with him, he noticed that his best decisions were made before 11 a.m. and his worst decisions were made after 4 p.m. And I think a lot of people would recognize that because for many people, their optimum thinking time, the time when their thinking is at its sharpest, at its clearest, is in the morning. Not everyone. Some people are night owls, and you'll know which one you are. But the point is you need to understand when is my best thinking time and how can I best utilise that. And once Tom understood that, things started to change. And this brings us to our first tip, and that is protect your peak time. Find your cognitive peak. As I said, for most it's the morning, and then ring fence it. Many leaders spend their peak time in back-to-back meetings on other people's agendas, and then by the time they get to their own agenda, they are depleted. So what Tom did, he blocked out the first 90 minutes of the day. No meetings, no email. It took him 3 weeks to withstand some of the pressure from internally because people were not used to this. They were used to him being in meetings, in those times. They were used to everybody being in meetings in those times, but he stuck to it. And over the 3 weeks, gradually people got used to it and other people started to copy it. and the quality of his most important decisions improve noticeably. So the second tip, reduce the volume that's reaching you. Now, I can actually hear some of you saying, that is impossible. It isn't, because not every decision that lands on your desk actually belongs there. And I think you know that. But sometimes it's just easier to do it yourself than put the thinking and the energy into delegating it to someone else. And sometimes that comes from thinking, well, everybody's busy. Or, well, maybe this should be my decision. So one of the things that you need to do is take some time. This is often what my coaches do when we're working together. They bring it into their coaching session and say, right, let's have a look at everything that's landing on my desk and let's see what actually belongs there and what doesn't. And then let's think about truly delegating those. And I've spoken about this before. Real delegation, not partial or anxious delegation. You need to transfer the authority within a framework. It does need to be within a framework so that you're clear. Whoever you're delegating to is clear. You've got guardrails around it so that they feel safe and you've got access to information when you need it. But then you let it go. You step back and allow them to make the decisions within that framework. And that comes onto frameworks because if you set up decision frameworks, you can build the rules once and then let the framework decide going forward. And what I mean by that is, what budget decisions need to come to me? What level of budget do I actually need to approve? And what level of budget could be approved by somebody else? What people decisions need to come to me? What are the strategic decisions that need to come to me? Are there any operational decisions that need to come to me? Or could 90% of those operational decisions be made elsewhere? Once you've built that framework and communicated it and discussed it, you can't do this on your own. This has to be with your team. Then you let the framework decide because you will then only get the right threshold of decision landing on your desk. One coachee that I had, she used to have a little mantra to herself. Is this high stakes and is it high visibility? If it fulfills both of those criteria, it has to come to my desk. It may not end on my desk, but it does have to come past me because that is where the risk could lie if something is high stakes and high visibility. And as I say, gradually, her team got used to this as well. And they understood it. And they had their own little criteria about what needed to come to them or what needed to be elsewhere. And so it can make a huge difference. And that's the way to start to reduce that volume that's reaching you. Third tip, schedule recovery time within the day. Our brain is not designed for uninterrupted cognitive load, no matter how much our organisational culture says that it should be. It's really not. The research at the University of Illinois said that even brief diversions can restore sustained performance. That could just be, and that's not just switching screens, by the way. That could be a short walk, getting some fresh air, genuinely disengaging, anything. And it only has to be 5 to 10 minutes. And then you can come back to it. But it has to be real. It's not just, I'm going to switch off, I'm going to go for a walk, but I'm watching my phone all the time, or I'm tapping out emails as I'm walking. That's not a break. See what you can do about building real breaks into your day. A couple of my coaches kind of took up this challenge and, they started taking lunch. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? But how many times do people skip lunch? They started going out for a short walk after a meeting and really working with their PAs to say, I need a break in between meetings. And again, PAs and EAs don't do this on purpose, but they're under pressure. So quite often they do give you back-to-back meetings. I remember one coach, he said, that literally she had to walk from one building to the next and she didn't have 10 minutes to do that in. So make sure that whoever is controlling your diary does it well and manages it so that you get breaks in between. And then think about deliberate deferral of decisions. So if somebody comes to you at 4 p.m. and wants a decision then, unless it genuinely requires it to be made at 4 p.m., then think about, I'll be better at this at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and say that. Say, okay, I need to think about this. I'll come back to you at 9:30 or 10 o'clock with a clear decision. And that's not weakness. That is exercising good judgment about how judgment works. So, to close, the best leaders make the right decisions well. They don't make the most decisions, they make the right decisions well. The tips to do this are protect your peak time, reduce the volume of decisions coming to you, and build in recovery time. If this has resonated with you, come and find me at loisburtononline.com or on LinkedIn. This has been Leadership Trailblazers. Remember, the way we led yesterday won't lead us into tomorrow. And thank you so much for being here.